Lonely rancher saved a native girl from certain death. The next day, 200 warriors appeared at his ranch. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Wyoming territory when Jake Thornton first heard the sound that would change his life forever. It was not the usual cry of hawks circling overhead or the distant lowing of cattle. This was something else entirely. Something that made his weathered hands pause on the fence post he was mending, and his pale blue eyes scan the horizon with sudden urgency. Jake had been alone on his ranch for 3 years now, ever since consumption took his wife Sarah and left him with nothing but 800 acres of stubborn land and memories that cut deeper than winter wind. At 42, his dark hair was already streaked with silver, and lines carved by sun and sorrow marked his face like a map of hard-lived years. The isolation suited him, or so he told himself every morning when he woke to empty silence. The sound came again, fainter this time, but unmistakably human. A voice carried on the prairie wind, weak and desperate. Jake dropped his tools and strode toward his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Molly, who had been his most faithful companion since Sarah's passing. The urgency in that distant cry spoke to something deep in his chest, something he had thought died with his wife. As he rode toward the source of the sound, the vast expanse of Wyoming stretched endlessly in every direction. Rolling hills covered in buffalo grass swayed in the breeze, and wildflowers dotted the landscape in patches of purple and yellow. The Rocky Mountains loomed in the distance like sleeping giants, their peaks still capped with snow despite the approaching summer. This was frontier country, where a man could ride for days without seeing another soul, where the nearest neighbor was 20 miles away, and where danger could appear as suddenly as a thunderstorm on a clear day. The cries grew stronger as Jake crested a low hill. Below him, near the banks of Willow Creek, he saw movement. At first glance, it looked like wild animals feeding, but as he drew closer, his blood turned cold. 3 wolves circled something on the ground, their gray forms moving with predatory patience. Between them lay a young woman, her dark hair spread across the rocky ground like spilled ink. Jake did not hesitate. He spurred Molly down the slope, drawing his rifle as they thundered toward the creek. The wolves looked up at his approach, their yellow eyes reflecting ancient wildness. For a moment, predator faced human in the timeless dance of survival. Then, Jake fired a shot into the air, and the pack scattered into the brush, disappearing as quickly as smoke. The young woman was barely conscious when Jake reached her. Her clothing, traditional native dress made of soft deerskin and decorated with intricate beadwork, was torn and stained with blood. Her olive-toned skin was pale from blood loss, and a deep gash ran along her left arm. She could not have been more than 20, with high cheekbones and features that spoke of Lakota heritage. Her dark eyes fluttered open as Jake knelt beside her, and for a moment they stared at each other across a divide of culture and circumstance. She tried to speak, but only a whisper emerged. Jake gently lifted her, surprised by how light she felt in his arms. She was burning with fever, and he knew that without immediate care, she would not survive the day. The decision came without thought. He had saved her from the wolves, but now he had to save her from death itself. The ride back to the ranch seemed endless. The young woman drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring words in what Jake recognized as Lakota. He had learned enough of the language during his early years on the frontier to understand she was calling for her father, speaking of home and safety. Her fevered dreams painted pictures of a world Jake could only imagine, a world of buffalo hunts and sacred ceremonies, of a people trying to hold on to their way of life as everything familiar disappeared around them. Jake's ranch house was modest but well built, constructed from local timber and stone. Sarah had insisted on real glass windows, a luxury that had taken him 2 years to afford. Now those windows let in golden afternoon light as he carried the injured woman inside and placed her gently on the bed he had shared with his wife. For a moment, the sight struck him as wrong somehow, as if he were betraying Sarah's memory. But then the young woman moaned softly, and practical necessity overrode sentiment. He had learned basic medical skills from necessity. On the frontier, a man who could not tend wounds and set bones did not survive long. He cleaned the gash on her arm with whiskey, noting that it was deep but had missed the major vessels. Her fever concerned him more than the wound. Using techniques Sarah had taught him, He bathed her face and arms with cool water, changed the dressings, and spooned broth between her lips when she was conscious enough to swallow. For 2 days, she hovered between life and death. Jake found himself checking on her constantly, drawn by something he could not name. Perhaps it was simply the presence of another human being in his house after so many months of solitude. Perhaps it was the way she fought for life with the same quiet determination he recognized in himself. When her fever finally broke on the 3rd morning, Jake felt a relief that surprised him with its intensity. She woke as the sun painted the mountains gold, her dark eyes clear and alert for the first time. She studied Jake's face for a long moment, taking in his kind eyes and gentle manner. When she tried to sit up, he motioned for her to remain still. "You are safe," he said, in halting Lakota, the words feeling strange on his tongue after so many years. Her eyes widened at hearing her native language, and she responded in English that, while accented, was perfectly clear. "You speak the old tongue." "Only a little. My name is Jake Thornton. I am Ayanna. It means eternal blossom in my language." Her voice was soft, but carried strength beneath its gentleness. "You saved my life." Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. Anyone would have done the same. "No," she said with quiet certainty. "Not anyone." Over the following days, as Ayanna recovered her strength, Jake learned her story. She was the daughter of Chief Standing Bear, leader of a small band of Lakota, who had been trying to reach the reservation in South Dakota. Their group had been attacked by soldiers, and in the confusion, Ayanna had been separated from her people. She had been wandering for days when the wolves found her. The knowledge that she was the chief's daughter should have filled Jake with worry. Relations between the Lakota and white settlers had been tense for years, punctuated by violence on both sides. But as he watched Ayanna move around his kitchen, helping with small tasks despite his protests that she should rest, Jake found his concerns overshadowed by something else entirely. Ayanna possessed a grace that reminded him of wind moving through prairie grass. She moved with purpose and dignity, whether she was grinding herbs for medicine or mending tears in her dress. Her intelligence was evident in the way she observed everything around her, asking questions about his cattle, his land, his life. She showed no fear of him, despite everything that had happened to her people at the hands of white men. "Why did you not turn me over to the soldiers at Fort McKinnon?" she asked one evening, as they sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "Because you needed help, not more trouble. That is not the only reason." He looked at her, seeing the knowing expression in her dark eyes. She was right, of course. In the week she had been recovering in his home, something had awakened in Jake that he thought had died with Sarah. It was not love exactly, but rather the recognition of a kindred spirit. Like him, Ayanna was caught between worlds, trying to find her place in a rapidly changing landscape. "My people will come looking for me," she said softly. "When they find me here." "Are you afraid of what they'll do to me?" Jake asked. Ayanna shook her head. "My father is a wise man. He will see that you saved his daughter's life, but others in our band have lost much to white settlers. Their grief makes them angry." Jake understood. He had seen the aftermath of conflicts between settlers and native tribes. The cycle of violence and revenge seemed endless, fed by fear and misunderstanding on both sides. The thought of Ayanna's people arriving at his ranch filled him with unease, but not because he feared for his own safety. He feared losing the unexpected gift of companionship she had brought to his lonely existence. As if sensing his thoughts, Ayanna reached out and touched his weathered hand with her slender fingers. The contact sent warmth up his arm and straight to his heart. "You have given me more than my life," she said. "You have shown me that not all white men are enemies, that there can be kindness between our peoples." The next morning dawned gray and overcast, with clouds gathering in the west like an approaching army. Jake was in the barn tending to Molly when he heard it. The sound was faint at first, barely distinguishable from the wind. But as it grew closer, there was no mistaking it. The thunder of many horses approaching at speed. He stepped outside and looked toward the eastern horizon. What he saw there made his blood freeze in his veins. A long line of riders was approaching, their forms wavering in the morning heat like a mirage. Even at this distance, he could see the distinctive silhouettes of Lakota warriors. their horses moving with the fluid grace of a people born to the saddle. Ayanna appeared beside him, her face grave. She had heard them too. "How many?" Jake asked, though he was already counting in his head. 200, she said quietly. "Perhaps more. My father has called in warriors from other bands." Jake felt his mouth go dry. 200 warriors. Even if they came in peace, which seemed unlikely given the circumstances, the sight of so many armed men would be enough to send word spreading across the territory like wildfire. The army would respond, and blood would flow. "You should go to them," Jake said, though the words cost him dearly, before they reached the ranch. Ayanna shook her head. "No. What happens now happens to both of us. Together." The warriors crested the final hill and spread out across the prairie like a human tide. Jake had never seen so many Lakota in one place. They rode with the easy confidence of men who had spent their lives on horseback, their ponies responding to subtle shifts in weight and pressure rather than reins. War paint adorned many faces, and eagle feathers fluttered in the morning breeze. Lances and rifles caught the filtered sunlight, creating points of brightness against the gray sky. At the head of the formation rode a man who could only be Chief Standing Bear. He was perhaps 50 years old, his long black hair streaked with silver and braided with beads and feathers. His face was weathered by sun and wind, marked by lines that spoke of both wisdom and sorrow. He wore traditional clothing that, while simple, carried an unmistakable air of authority. Even from a distance, Jake could see the intelligence in the chief's dark eyes and the way the other warriors looked to him for guidance. The war party stopped just outside rifle range of the ranch house, their horses stamping and snorting in the morning air. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring as 200 pairs of eyes focused on the small homestead where a white rancher stood beside the chief's daughter. Chief Standing Bear urged his horse forward, leaving his warriors behind. He rode slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving Jake's face. When he was 20 yards away, he stopped and studied the scene before him. His daughter stood close to the white man, but not as a prisoner. There were no bonds on her wrists, no fear in her posture. Instead, she carried herself with the dignity of a woman who had been treated with respect and kindness. "I am Standing Bear," the chief said in English, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. "You have my daughter." "Yes," Jake replied, keeping his own voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "I found her wounded by Willow Creek. Wolves were—" He paused, realizing that mentioning the wolves might sound like he was embellishing his role as rescuer. "I know what you found," Standing Bear said. "The question is what you have done since." Before Jake could answer, Ayanna stepped forward. She spoke rapidly in Lakota, her voice carrying the musical cadences of her native tongue. Jake could understand perhaps one word in 5, but he heard his name mentioned several times, along with words that seemed to describe his care of her. Standing Bear listened without interruption, his expression revealing nothing. When Ayanna finished speaking, silence settled over the prairie once again. Behind Standing Bear, Jake could see some of the younger warriors shifting restlessly on their horses. Their faces showed barely contained hostility, and he realized that not all of them would be satisfied with a peaceful resolution to this encounter. Standing Bear dismounted and walked slowly toward Jake, stopping when they were close enough to read the truth in each other's eyes. For a long moment, the two men studied each other across the divide of race and culture that had spawned so much bloodshed. "My daughter tells me you saved her life," Standing Bear said finally. "That you cared for her as you would care for your own family. That you have shown her respect and kindness. She needed help," Jake said simply. "I gave what I could." "Why?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond the immediate situation. Jake knew that his answer would determine not just his own fate, but potentially the fate of everyone in the surrounding territory. If Standing Bear decided that Jake had somehow wronged his daughter, if the young warriors behind him convinced their chief that honor demanded revenge, this prairie could run red with blood before the day was over. "Because she is a human being in need," Jake said. "Because it was the right thing to do." Standing Bear nodded slowly, as if Jake's answer confirmed something he already knew. "You could have turned her over to the soldiers at the fort. There would have been a reward." "I thought about it," Jake admitted, seeing no point in lying. "For about 5 seconds. What changed your mind? Jake looked at Ayanna, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. She reminded me that kindness still exists in this world, that maybe there is still hope for understanding between our peoples. Behind Standing Bear, Jake could hear murmurs among the warriors. Some sounded approving, others less so. The chief raised his hand, and silence fell immediately. You speak of understanding, Standing Bear said, but your people have taken our lands, killed our buffalo, forced us onto reservations. Your soldiers hunt us like animals. Why should we believe that one white man's kindness represents anything more than weakness? The challenge in the chief's voice was unmistakable, but Jake sensed that it was not entirely hostile. Rather, Standing Bear was testing him, trying to understand what manner of man had cared for his daughter. Because, Jake said, meeting the chief's gaze directly, hatred is a circle that keeps growing wider unless someone chooses to step outside it. Your daughter was dying. I chose to help her live. Nothing else mattered in that moment. Standing Bear was quiet for a long moment, considering Jake's words. Around them, the prairie wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of approaching rain. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the darkening sky. My daughter also tells me, Standing Bear said finally, that you spoke to her in the old tongue, that you treated her not as a savage, but as a person worthy of respect. This is rare among your people. Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks again. My wife taught me that all people have value, regardless of the color of their skin or the language they speak. Your wife? She died 3 years ago. Consumption. Something shifted in Standing Bear's expression, a softening around the eyes that spoke of shared grief. You know the pain of loss. Yes. Then you understand why my warriors are angry. We have lost much. Our way of life, our freedom, our young men to your soldiers' bullets. Some would say that every white man must pay for these losses. Jake nodded, understanding the weight behind the chief's words. I cannot undo what has been done. I can only choose how to act now, in this moment. Standing Bear turned to look at his daughter, and Jake saw the love and concern that passed between them. When the chief turned back, his expression had changed again. Ayanna has asked me to spare your life, he said. She believes you are a good man caught in bad times, but life is not the only thing at stake here. Jake frowned, not understanding. What do you mean? Word will spread that 200 Lakota warriors rode to your ranch. The soldiers will come, asking questions. They will want to know why we came, what we wanted, whether we threatened you. How you answer those questions will determine whether more blood is shed. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. If he told the truth about finding Ayanna, about caring for her, the soldiers might see it as evidence of collusion with the enemy. But if he lied, if he claimed the warriors had threatened him, it would justify military action against Standing Bear's people. There is another way, Standing Bear continued, a way that might serve both our peoples. Jake waited, sensing that whatever the chief was about to propose would change everything. My daughter has no husband, Standing Bear said, his words carrying carefully across the watching warriors. Among our people, when a man saves the life of an unmarried woman, there are traditions, obligations of honor. Jake felt his heart stop. Behind Standing Bear, he could see the reaction among the warriors. Some nodded approval, while others looked shocked or angry. Ayanna's eyes were wide, but Jake could not read her expression. You are suggesting, Jake began, but Standing Bear raised his hand. I am suggesting that what appears to be a problem might instead be an opportunity. Your people and mine stand at the edge of war. But if a white rancher and the daughter of a Lakota chief were to join their lives, it might serve as a bridge between our worlds. The magnitude of what Standing Bear was proposing hit Jake like lightning. Marriage to Ayanna would protect her honor and provide an explanation for the warrior's presence that satisfied both cultures. More than that, it would create a bond between families that transcended the racial hatred tearing the frontier apart. But it would also mean giving up any hope of a quiet life, of avoiding the conflicts that raged across the territory. It would make him a target for those on both sides who opposed any form of cooperation between white settlers and native tribes. Jake looked at Ayanna, searching her face for some sign of how she felt about her father's proposal. She met his gaze steadily, and he saw something there that made his pulse quicken. Not love, perhaps, but respect and affection, and something deeper that might grow into love given time. "What does Ayana say about this?" Jake asked. Standing Bear spoke to his daughter in Lakota, and she responded at length. Jake caught enough words to understand that she was expressing her own views rather than simply agreeing with her father's wishes. "She says," Standing Bear translated, "that you have already proven yourself to be a man of honor, that you treated her with kindness when you could have taken advantage, that she would be proud to call you husband." Jake felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Everything he had thought he knew about his future was changing in the span of a few minutes. But as he looked at Ayana's face, at the hope and trust he saw there, he realized that maybe change was exactly what he needed. "And if I agree?" he asked. "What then? Then we hold the ceremony here now, before all these witnesses. You become my son-in-law, and she becomes your wife. Our peoples become family. And when the soldiers come asking questions, you tell them that Lakota warriors came to attend a wedding, not to make war." The elegance of the solution was breathtaking. A marriage ceremony would explain everything while creating a bond that both cultures would respect. But Jake also understood the risks. There would be those among the white settlers who would see his marriage to a Lakota woman as betrayal, just as there would be warriors among Standing Bear's people who would view any alliance with whites as weakness. Thunder rolled across the prairie, closer now, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Jake looked up at the darkening sky, then back at the faces watching him. 200 warriors waited for his answer, their futures somehow tied to his decision. Ayana watched him with eyes that held no pressure, only patience and trust. In that moment, Jake thought of Sarah and the dreams they had shared for this land. She had always believed that people of different backgrounds could find common ground if they approached each other with open hearts. Perhaps this was what she would have wanted, a chance to heal some of the wounds that divided their world. Jake stepped forward and extended his hand to Standing Bear. "I accept your proposal, with honor and gratitude." The chief clasped Jake's hand, and a cheer went up from many of the warriors. Not all joined in, Jake noticed, but enough to suggest that Standing Bear's solution had support among his people. The marriage ceremony was unlike anything Jake had ever witnessed. It combined elements of both Lakota and Christian traditions, conducted in both languages with warriors and Sky as witnesses. Ayana wore flowers that she braided into her hair, picked from Jake's own garden. Jake wore his best shirt, the one Sarah had sewn for him before she died. When it was over, when the words were spoken and the vows exchanged, Jake found himself married to a woman he had known for less than 2 weeks. But as Ayana took his hand and smiled at him with genuine warmth, he felt something settle in his chest that he had not experienced since Sarah's death. Hope, perhaps, or simply the recognition that he was no longer alone. The rain began in earnest as the ceremony concluded, sending warriors scrambling for shelter under the ranch house eaves and in the barn. What followed was perhaps the strangest wedding reception in the history of the Wyoming Territory, with Lakota warriors sharing Jake's limited supply of coffee and jerky, while rain drummed on the roof above their heads. As evening approached and the storm passed, Standing Bear prepared to depart with his warriors. He spoke privately with his daughter, their conversation too quiet and rapid for Jake to follow. When they embraced, Jake saw tears in both their eyes. "She stays with you now," Standing Bear told Jake as he mounted his horse. "But remember, she is still my daughter. If harm comes to her through your actions or negligence, I will know." "I understand," Jake replied. "You have my word that she will be safe and honored." Standing Bear nodded, then looked out over the prairie that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. "Times are changing," he said. "The old ways are dying, and new ways must be born. Perhaps what happened here today is part of that birth." With that, he wheeled his horse around and led his warriors back into the gathering dusk. Jake and Ayana stood together watching until the last rider disappeared over the hills, leaving them alone with the vast sky and the endless grass and the uncertain future they would face together. That night, as they sat by the fire in Jake's modest home, Ayana asked him about his fears. "Are you afraid of what your people will say when they learn of our marriage?" Jake considered the question carefully. "Some will be angry, yes. They will say I have betrayed my own kind. But others might see it as you and your father do, as a bridge between our worlds. And you?" What do you see it as? Jake looked at his new wife, at the way the firelight played across her face and caught the highlights in her dark hair. I see it as a gift I never expected to receive. A second chance at happiness when I thought that part of my life was over. Ayanna smiled, and Jake felt his heart lift in a way it had not done for years. Outside, the prairie stretched away in all directions, vast and wild and full of possibilities. Tomorrow would bring challenges, he knew. There would be questions from neighbors, probably visits from soldiers, certainly opposition from some quarters. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Jake Thornton was not alone. And as thunder rolled across the distant mountains and lightning illuminated the endless sky, he dared to hope that the future might hold more than mere survival. Perhaps it might hold something approaching joy.